Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel.
Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question asks, how can somebody repel a narcissist? So what this question is really getting at is, if somebody is looking for a romantic relationship, or really a friendship, or a relationship in even some other context, they may want to manifest behavior that will push people who are narcissistic away from them, reducing the risk of entering into a romantic relationship with a narcissist or one of those other types of relationships. Now in this video I'm going to be looking more at how to repel a grandiose narcissist as opposed to a vulnerable narcissist. And I'll explain a little bit about those two types of narcissism. So because they're quite different, the strategies used to repel one likely may not be successful with the other. You really have to kind of reevaluate the strategies independently for each type of narcissism. So when we look at narcissism, again, we have two types, grandiose and vulnerable. With both, we see self-centeredness, a sense of entitlement, a need for admiration, and having low agreeableness. With grandiose narcissism, we also have high extroversion, low neuroticism, arrogance, being socially dominant, self-confident, having a superficial charm, being resistant to criticism, and being optimistic. With vulnerable narcissism, we see characteristics like low extroversion, high neuroticism, being resentful, distrusting other people, being hypersensitive to criticism, being socially awkward, and being pessimistic. So again, the two types of narcissism are really quite different, and here I'll just be looking at the grandiose narcissist. So one of the questions that comes up when trying to answer this question is, why repel the grandiose narcissist? People have all different types of personality traits. Why would somebody want to push a certain set of people away from them, people with certain types of personality traits away from them? Well, you wouldn't necessarily want to repel a grandiose narcissist. It would be a personal choice. But in terms of romantic partner selection, there are some reasons that have come up in the scientific literature and other places that make it seem like entering into a romantic relationship with a grandiose narcissist may not be the best idea. We see the grandiose narcissists have a lack of interest in forming close relationships. In long-term relationships, they tend to have more conflicts with their partners. They seek revenge more often. They tend to have no forgiveness for their partner or less forgiveness. They also tend to be selfish, lack respect, tolerance, and empathy in long-term relationships. They also view their romantic partners in a less positive light. They demonstrate low emotional intimacy, trust, and love. They also tend to lack warmth and caring. They have a higher risk of infidelity and divorce, a higher risk of being aggressive, and in general we see low relationship satisfaction and low relationship quality. So if you look at it, there are really a lot of reasons why somebody at least might want to think twice about entering into a romantic relationship with a grandiose narcissist. In terms of other contexts, like being a friend of a grandiose narcissist, again, it's just a matter of personal choice. We see these deleterious effects with romantic relationships. There are different effects for friendships and other types of relationships, really beyond the scope of what I'm talking about here. Here I'm really just restricting this to romantic relationships and running under the assumption that some people may want to repel a grandiose narcissist, kind of steer clear of them, and select a partner who does not have those set of traits. Now, I've seen a lot of information about how to repel someone who's narcissistic. We see other videos, we see these different blogs where people have kind of all these tactics that mostly just involve being irritating in order to drive somebody away. But the problem with that is the strategies that would repel a narcissist may repel anyone, which kind of defeats the purpose of implementing the strategy at all. It would only be effective if it mostly only repelled somebody with grandiose narcissism and did not affect people who were non-narcissistic. Drawing an analogy over to mental health treatment, if you said you had a test that was 100% sensitive to detect depression, meaning it correctly identified true positives, people that really had depression, that would sound like a really good test. But then if you said it is 100% sensitive because it indicates that everyone has it, well, okay, that still means it retains that 100% sensitivity, but it has 0% specificity, meaning it has no probability of correctly identifying negatives. And that's really the problem we get into here with strategies to avoid grandiose narcissist or to repel grandiose narcissist. If you alienate everyone, yes, you won't have to deal with narcissist, but you will be rejecting non-narcissist as well. You won't have to deal with anybody. And again, I think that really defeats the point of a carefully planned strategy. Another challenge here is that narcissism is associated with romantic success in the short term, but again, it appears bad for long-term relationships. So narcissists are very attractive in the beginning, what they call the zero acquaintance level, when you first meet somebody. So it makes having some sort of strategy to identify narcissist and potentially to repel narcissist important. Again, they're extra attractive in that early stage, so it's hard to not be attracted to them. And research actually supports this repeatedly. We see in the research literature that grandiose narcissists report a greater endorsement for casual, uncommitted sex. They tend to have more lifetime sexual partners and a greater desire for short-term mates. We see that they tend to do well in what's called the emerging zone, again, the short-term relationship, and they tend to fail in what's referred to as the enduring zone, the long-term relationship. So really just a different way of saying the same thing that I said before. So how does one repel a grandiose narcissist? So I'm just going to provide some thoughts here on some poor strategies and then a few strategies I think make more sense, but I'm not advocating deception. I think that's an important point to make. Again, this is a personal choice. If somebody wants to try to repel a grandiose narcissist, they have to be responsible for the consequences of that behavior. And really, it depends on an individual situation as to whether any of these strategies would pay off. They're really just more like ideas based on what we see in clinical experience and the research literature that I think make sense, but that doesn't mean they'll work for everybody. That doesn't mean they'll work at all necessarily. So taking a look at the first poor strategy, I've seen this many times presented, and this is this argument of if somebody's single, they should try to appear like they're in a relationship. That if you appear like you're in a relationship, you'll repel the grandiose narcissist. Well, I've talked about this before. You also repel people who are not narcissistic, but let's just go with this for a moment and explore what the research says about this. So appearing like you're taken and hoping this will push grandiose narcissist away. So grandiose narcissists self-report more frequent mate poaching. So mate poaching is when an individual tries to have mostly a short-term sexual relationship with somebody who's already in a relationship. So we define it as behaviors that are enacted to attract someone in a relationship for the purpose of sex. 50% of people have tried to poach a mate, so this is a fairly common behavior. Now, in terms of narcissism and mate poaching, we see a difference by gender. Grandiose narcissistic men actually do not have a greater interest in mate poaching, even though they report more mate poaching activity. Grandiose narcissistic women may have a greater interest in mate poaching, but the research really isn't clear on this. So what we see is the grandiose narcissists in general do not factor in the relationship status before they approach somebody. So it's not a matter of they look for people who are in relationships, it's a matter of they're indifferent either way. And this is especially the case. The level of indifference is particularly high for short-term relationships. Now, the only exception here is for short-term relationships that involve sex. Grandiose narcissists do prefer, in this situation, to have a partner who is in a relationship. And the thinking behind this is that it will not result in any type of emotional entanglements because, again, the person already has a partner. That's the idea, the theory that explains why this might happen. So in terms of this idea of appearing attached, this won't help either way, and it may actually hurt a little if the objective is to repel a narcissist. So I'll cover one more poor strategy before I get to these strategies I think are a little better. And I've heard this one a lot too. This is acting narcissistic. So the idea is if you act narcissistic, you'll drive away the grandiose narcissist because narcissists don't like other narcissists. Well, this runs into the same problem I talked about a few times before now, which is, of course, if you act narcissistic, you also repel people who are non-narcissistic. But there's some other problems here. One is, I think, that acting narcissistic, if you're not actually narcissistic, is unsustainable. It's a set of personality traits. So if you don't have those traits, you're not going to be able to do this for very long. It's going to be exhausting and a lot of work and feel very unnatural. Now, the other problem here is that grandiose narcissists actually find high narcissism, as compared to low narcissism, as less dislikable. So narcissists do dislike other narcissists, but they dislike them less. So the verdict here for acting narcissistic, this won't work either. This isn't a good strategy to repel a narcissist. It might actually cause a narcissist to be more attracted. So I've talked about a couple strategies I think would not be effective. So what would work? What potentially would work anyway? Well, in order to explain this, we need to understand why narcissists fail at long-term relationships. Grandiose narcissistic behavior can be divided into two dimensions: admiration and rivalry. And this actually gives us, I think, a fairly good insight into developing strategies to repel someone who's narcissistic. So admiration is characterized by the narcissistic tendency to promote a positive view of oneself. So admiration is about seeking admiration from people in society. Individuals who would score high on this dimension strive to be unique. They think a lot about their own grandiosity. They demonstrate a behavior that's self-assured, dominant, expressive, and charming. This is referred to as assertive self-enhancement. And these behaviors actually lead to positive social outcomes most of the time. For example, people who are high in admiration tend to be promoted in career settings. They tend to be liked by people in general. They tend to be looked at as attractive, and people tend to trust them. Now, rivalry is actually quite different. It's a tendency to protect oneself from a negative self-view by putting down other people. So really it's striving for supremacy by devaluing other people, by seeking revenge, being selfish, socially insensitive, arrogant, condescending, hostile, and aggressive. So people who have high rivalry tend to lack warmth, trust, and forgiveness. This is referred to as antagonistic self-protection. And this behavior often leads to negative social outcomes. So being fired or demoted in a work setting, disliked, and avoided by other people. Now, what's interesting here is that admiration is actually good for both short-term and long-term relationships. Although it's not excessively good for long-term relationships, it's just a little bit better than neutral. But it is actually good, which is odd because usually we think of narcissism as destructive. But this kind of brings me back to a point I've made in other videos about the adaptive components of narcissism. Admiration, while not altogether positive, does again seem to be good for relationships. So it does appear to be a more adaptive component of narcissism. Now, rivalry is actually bad for both short-term and long-term relationships. So at least in terms of romantic relationships, we see a clear divider between admiration and rivalry. So with these concepts in mind, that leaves us with a few strategies to repel the narcissist. So the first one would be to never express an interest in a short-term relationship. Or if the grandiose narcissist expresses an interest in a short-term relationship or sex, act not interested and then change the subject. So this is actually a fairly, I think, good tactic to repel a narcissist based on what we know about narcissists from the research literature. A primary interest of a narcissist in a romantic relationship is that short-term relationship and, in particular, sexual activity. So to move away from that topic, to say that you're not interested in that, that's going to repel the narcissist. Now, the next strategy really has to do with that admiration and rivalry dichotomy I talked about before. So one of the keys here is that recognizing that rivalry is really the set of traits you want to avoid more than admiration. Rivalry really has the destructive traits to romantic relationships. So those are the traits, again, you want to avoid. So the strategy here would be to compliment somebody else. So when talking to the grandiose narcissist, compliment somebody else who's not there, and compliment a person that has the same skill set that the grandiose narcissist appears to have. So for example, if the grandiose narcissist wants to tell you about how attractive they are, and you say, oh yeah, I see this actor or actress, and they're really attractive, right? Like, they have amazing levels of beauty and appeal, and you can maybe describe like how their eyes are pretty, or attractive or whatever. And what you'll see here is the grandiose narcissist will try to interject their own attractiveness, right? They'll try to say, well, I'm attractive too, my eyes are attractive too. And I think the important component here is to seem indifferent to that response. So like you're not even listening, like you're still daydreaming about the other person. Or, and this is a little more irritating, I think, a little more dismissive, say something like, if they say, oh, they're attractive too, they're as attractive as this actor or actress, you could say, oh, it's cute that you would think that, right? It's kind of a dismissive, really kind of narcissistic comment that acknowledges that they said that they were as attractive as this actor or actress, but then really just dismisses it out of hand. So I think that in many cases that would probably repel a narcissist, and of course the danger there would be it could repel someone else. But someone who's not narcissistic should be okay with hearing about how another person is attractive too, without having to compare themselves to that person. I think the key here with this tactic is to really hit on a characteristic that's strong for the narcissist, right? I think that is really what makes this tactic work or not work a lot of the times. So just to use another example here. Say the narcissist is like a mechanic and they own their own shop, right? So they fix cars in their own shop. And let's say they specialize in cars that they consider exotic, right? Not that a mechanic who works on an exotic car is really any better than another mechanic, but they might think that because narcissists are attracted to kind of brand name, high status products. So say they work on like Ferraris and Lamborghinis, right? So they view that as high status. So in this example, I'm just going to presume that the mechanic is a male. Of course, they wouldn't have to be a male. But in this situation, you could say, I know a guy who's the best mechanic. He has his own place. It's this big building, has all these bay doors. He works on really special cars, like Fords and Nissans, right? Now, I have nothing against Ford or Nissan, but clearly they're at a different level than like Ferrari or Lamborghini. And this is, in a sense, being a little bit dismissive too, almost acting like you don't really know the difference in the prices or the status associated with those cars. That's really going to aggravate the narcissist and probably push them away because you're not acknowledging how special they are, and you're acknowledging how special somebody else is even when they don't feel that person is as special as them. So essentially this tactic is also based on irritation. Now if the response from the narcissist was something like, don't you understand that Lamborghinis and Ferraris are superior to Fords and Nissans? You could say something like, I wouldn't believe that in a million years, right? So really just taking that high status component away from them, and again, that's going to repel them. So the last strategy here, and I think this is really a key strategy, would be to recognize that narcissists are more attracted to people who admire them than people who are caring, right? So if they have to choose between somebody who tells them how great they are and someone who genuinely cares about them, they're going to go with the person who tells them how great they are. So one of the keys is really what we fail to do, right? And this is fail to compliment. Don't pay the narcissist a direct compliment. Once you compliment, you put yourself kind of in that admire category. Now you could argue that a compliment is also caring, but I think a narcissist would tend to see a direct compliment more as admiration. So once you make that first compliment, for some people who are narcissistic, that's almost like a drug. That's highly addictive. That's what they're attracted to. So by failing to compliment, you're going to have an absence of attraction or maybe even a repulsion that develops there. That might push the narcissist away, and they might move on to somebody else who does show them admiration. So those are some of my thoughts on some strategies that maybe aren't so good and some strategies I think are a bit better. But like I said before, it really depends on the individual and the situation. And if you're really trying to develop a comprehensive strategy on how to maintain distance or closeness in romantic relationships, it's a good idea to see a counselor. A counselor can really get to the bottom of the different issues going on and look at somebody's values and preferences and skills and help them to navigate the complexity of romantic relationships. Romantic relationships are really a high-stakes game. Potentially, meeting the right romantic partner could mean a life of being relatively happy, and meeting the wrong partner and engaging with that person could mean a life of being miserable. So it is an important decision to make correctly the first time, if possible. I know whenever I talk about romantic relationships and narcissism, there'll be a variety of opinions and thoughts, people who agree with me, people who disagree with me, people who have had different experiences with narcissist and romantic relationships. Please put those opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found this description on strategies to repel a narcissist to be interesting. Thanks for watching.